Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. First question. Hey Jason, I'm doing a good amount of push-ups daily to prepare for a Firefighter 1 Academy. I'm doing 3 to 4 sets of 10 to 20 push-ups, trying to work up on reps. Right now, my hands and wrists have been bothering me at times when I do push-ups. My form is rather clean, hands below the nipple line, elbows in line and not flaring out. I pause at the bottom. Are there any common push-up form mistakes that could be causing this discomfort? Thanks. Yeah, I really hate that they use push-ups and some of these various things to really determine your level of fitness, because push-ups can be a bit hard on your wrists. What I'm going to recommend, because you'll still get the specificity that you want without putting that same strain on your wrists, I'm going to recommend that you start stretching your wrist more. You can do that by taking your fingertips and pressing them together and lifting your elbows and stretching your wrists several times a day. That's going to help you with the mobility and flexibility there, because that could be messing with you on those push-ups. Number two, if you're just trying to build the strength curve of it without putting the strain on your wrist, and you want to just do that for testing purposes, maybe a couple times a week to see where you're at on your max push-up reps, you can do them without doing this. But they make little perfect push-up devices, but you don't need to buy those. If you have a pair of fixed dumbbells, like just those cast dumbbells, 20s, 25, something like that, you can use those and put them down under you so that you can actually get a deeper range of motion on the push-up without putting that same strain on your wrist, because it's like grabbing a heavy dumbbell or barbell. It's going to be less stressful on your wrists than the push-ups themselves are. And then you can flex your wrists every single day, do the push-ups with the dumbbells, and that way you'll actually get better at push-ups more efficiently, because you're going to find that you can go deeper on those. So when you go to the shorter range of motion that you normally would do when they have you doing push-ups in testing, or when you test yourself once or twice a week, they're going to be a lot easier. So you're going to put that less of that overuse stress up on that wrist joint and just keep it flexible. And like I said, maybe at least once a week come in and test yourselves on the normal ones to see where you're at for your max push-ups, and then the other days just do that sub-maximal training the way that you're doing it with the dumbbells. And I think that's going to give you the best of both worlds. It's going to let you pass your push-up test with flying colors easier without putting that stress on your wrists. So hopefully that helps you out, and best of luck with your firefighting career. I think that is a noble profession, and we need more people willing to do work like that. All right, next question. I've lifted for almost 20 years and still struggle to pick weights for the working sets. Honestly, anything over 80 kilograms on big compounds just feels heavy when pyramiding up. 100 kilogram squat doesn't feel lighter easier than 140 kilograms. Form is just better if it's lighter. You know, I totally get that, brother. Like for me on deadlifts, because I deadlift almost every single workout session, I usually do a warm-up set with 405 before I jump up to 500-ish. And for me personally, I can't tell them apart on the first few reps. Meaning a 3-rep set with 400 feels pretty much the same as 500 does. So again, what I base it on is, rather than how I feel, I watch how fast the bar comes up. So what I generally recommend is you're ramping up, because as you get heavier and heavier, when you reach a certain threshold with weights versus your body weight, it feels the same heaviness no matter how heavy it is. I totally get that. What you need to base it on is how stiff you feel sometimes doing it, and how fast the bar moves. Like how fast can you lift it on those warm-ups or as you're ramping up. And as long as the bar speed is sufficient, you know that you have a lot more strength in the tank. But when the bar speed starts slowing down, I like to, for more advanced lifters like that, particularly again as you get older, like you said, sometimes your joints just feel stiff, the weight feels heavy no matter what. Don't base it on how it feels. Base it upon bar speed. How fast can you move it? And use that for your rate of perceived exertion. Your RPEs should be based really, I think, on bar speed at a certain point rather than how you feel. Because again, the problem you have, I get the exact same thing. So I base it purely upon bar speed when selecting weights for things like my deadlifts. So hopefully that helps you out there and gives you a better idea of how to look at it. All right, next question. Hi Jason, I was wondering if you know anything about how eating soon before a workout can affect it. Are there any negligible benefits to carving up pre-workout, and does lifting on a full stomach negatively affect performance in the gym? All right, fantastic question. In my experience, just observing people over the years, observing myself, there is a very large individual component with this. Some people handle a full stomach better in the gym than others do, and honestly, some of it depends on how you're training. What I will say is that if you're doing any sort of significant volume on things like squats, deadlifts, anything that's going to use your whole body or put a lot of intra-abdominal pressure on you, it's not so much that the full stomach impedes performance, it's that the pressure in there can become a real problem for you, could make you prone to throwing up, and that extra pressure going the other direction can really affect your core stability and ability to perform sometimes without getting nauseated, feeling like you're going to puke. That's a very, very individual thing. What I will recommend, though, is that if you're going to do anything like that that's going to raise intra-abdominal pressure significantly, don't eat a lot of fiber. Focus on carbs, but find carbs that are a little less fibrous. You don't want to consume a giant thing of brown rice with black beans in it before you train. Keep that fiber moderate. Things like a little bit of whole wheat toast are probably okay. Grits, oatmeal with a little extra fruit added in it. The main thing, get carbs in, but the amount of carbs and the amount of fiber that you can handle is going to vary a lot person to person. What I also have noticed is that, again, that heavy intra-abdominal pressure, some people can't handle fatty meals as well before they train. So again, that depends on the person. And that makes sense when you think about it, because fat requires more gastric acids to break down than a lot of other foods. So that extra acid that your body's having to produce there can sometimes interfere with your training, because your body's putting more effort into breaking down that fat in your stomach. And you know what? It's not like you're using that fat to train on. It's not like it's helping you. You're not using dietary fat to burn when you're resistance training in any way. So it's not helping you. The main focus needs to be on carbs and determining how much you can personally eat, because any carbs at all, even a small amount, 100 calories of carbs, 200 calories of carbs before you lift, is going to boost your performance slightly when training. The amount that you can tolerate before it starts to interfere due to your GI tract being full or bloated is going to be a very, very individual thing, and it's actually going to vary depending upon the workout you're doing. Of course, the downside to it is obviously the higher volume you're working and the bigger body parts that you're using, the more carbs will benefit you, but also the more that having a full stomach can interfere as well. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. And you know what? You're going to have to experiment around a little bit and see what works best for you as far as total intake. But I will always tell people, be very careful of too much fiber, and in particularly too much fat in your gut before you train. They can both be problematic in a way, but definitely carbs in general are known to improve performance up to a certain point for any given individual in the weight room. Again, a little bit of experimentation is going to be required, but again, just be careful of certain foods. All right, next question. Is deloading for the whole body, or can it be done for one muscle group? Right now, my quads felt tired and sore during the last 2 workouts, but all my other body parts and lifts are fine. Great question. Some of that is going to depend upon the reasons in which you are deloading. If you're deloading because of overreaching and you want to super compensate from that from recovery purposes, meaning you've pushed yourself to the point to where you're now overreaching and you need to back down in order to adapt and make gains from that overreaching, you need a full body deload, because recovery from all of that is systematic. Your peripheral nervous system, all the various connective tissue, joints in your body, everything is going to be affected by that. So individual body part deloads are absolutely not going to do that much as far as the systematic adaptation to programmed or planned overreaching. So again, if you're trying to do it for dual factor recovery models because you're overreaching and pushing your body beyond its recovery ability and then backing down so you can adapt to that pushing beyond its limits, you need to do an entire full body deload. If you are deloading because of sore connective tissue, which is the other reason to deload, that's how you prevent injuries, that's how you stop overuse injuries. You're getting connective tissue that's getting inflamed, you really only have to deload the body parts that are doing that. But here's the catch. You need to deload every exercise that hits that connective tissue. For example, let's say your elbows are starting to hurt and you only deload your chin-ups and bicep curls and maybe your tricep work, but you continue to deadlift heavy. That deadlift is putting a very, very large amount of stress upon your bicep tendons, those lower insertions. So by failing to deload your deadlift as well, or anything in which you grip and pull the bar heavy, even shrugs, by failing to deload those as well, you're continuing to put that stress on the connective tissue and you're still not allowing it to recover. So it can become problematic when you only do single body part deloads without factoring in that, hey, a lot of other exercises are still stressing that connective tissue. Because again, deloads are one of the ways that you prevent connective tissue injury, connective tissue tendonitis, all of these other things from excessive overuse without giving them time to recover recover. So it gets a little tricky. In some cases, if you're getting sore connective tissue in one place, you might start getting it in other places very soon also. So you still might want to consider a full body deload. But remember, if you do a single body part deload, you need to make sure that all the exercises that stress that connective tissue get deloaded as well, not just the isolation movements or specific ones. You need to look at it really closely, and what you're going to find is that a lot of your big compounds are still going to get deloaded anyways. Perfect example, the deadlift. If your elbows and biceps are hurting, you're going to have to deload the deadlift still. So again, it's going to be specific to what you're trying to do. So the answer is both, but it really depends. All right, next question and last question of the week. On your linear block hypertrophy program, when you move on to a new phase, are you supposed to hit all the reps out of the gate? Or is it realistic to miss a rep or two on the first day and then work to getting all the reps by the end of the block? No, I fully expect you to get them all the way through. You shouldn't be missing reps ever at all on my block periodization program. If you are missing reps, you've done something very, very wrong. I'm going to go back in a second and discuss what you might have done, but there's a good chance you're not getting enough sleep or you're not getting enough food in. If you're not getting enough food or sleep in, you really have no business running an aggressive program like block periodization, because you're trying to run a program that is going to be a maximum response program that's going to give you maximum training adaptation, that's well programmed, well planned, but you're not fulfilling the other factors in your lifestyle to go with it. So you're just wasting your time at that point. People who aren't getting 8 hours of sleep every night, people who aren't getting sufficient calories, carbohydrates, and things in really have no business running serious training protocols like that. Because you're not gearing your whole life around it. Why would you gear a training program around it that assumes your whole lifestyle is compliant to that? Because these are for people with very serious goals who are willing to put in very serious work. And that's okay if you're not. If you're not willing to eat and sleep and do everything that you need to run a program like that, that's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that you're trying to do things in the gym and get the results of something that which your whole lifestyle isn't really geared around, and you need to go on a less aggressive program if that's the case. The other big mistake could be that you didn't honestly assess your 1 rep maxes, meaning when people test those maxes, for example, I've had a lot of people complain that they knew what their overhead press was and their bench press, but when they do the overhead press on the same day as the bench press in my block program, they're struggling with the overhead press. And my question to them would be, if you had truly tested your bench press on the day that you did the testing to determine what weights to use, you should have been fatigued. And if you did the overhead press the next exercise right after it, shortly after it, like you were supposed to do, you wouldn't be programming your overhead press off of a fresh overhead press rep max. You would be testing it off of one that already accounts for the fatigue, because you're already fatigued from the bench press. So you waited too long on testing day to test your overhead press instead of the amount of time you're going to wait during actual training, and you didn't get a realistic assessment. Number 2, people overestimate this stuff. They come in and they try to push everything to the limit, take a bunch of pre-workouts, everything else sometimes before they come in and test their actual training maxes so that they can get their percentages, and they overestimate them sometimes. And that can be a problem also. Maybe people didn't calculate it right. You know what? When it comes to determining your actual maxes so that you can do the percentages for a block periodization program, it's better to be more conservative. Meaning, if you're not sure if your 1 rep max is actually 430 versus 450 for that exercise, err on the side of caution and calculate it at 430. Don't calculate it at 450, because the worst thing you could do is to put so much weight on the bar because you miscalculated what your 1 rep maxes were or your rep maxes, that you end up missing lifts in the middle of the training. If you're missing lifts throughout the program, and you know that your sleep is on point, you know that your nutrition is on point, then you screwed up on selecting the weights. You went too aggressive as far as determining what weights you were supposed to use and what your actual predicted maxes were. You need to reel it back in a notch. You need to cut that stuff down a few percentages. You should not be missing lifts on the new blocks ever. That means you miscalculated something. And again, that's a problem. People come in and they go the other way. They get too aggressive. They overestimate what they can lift. They don't test it correctly when determining their maxes and everything. And again, that's something that can be addressed by being honest with yourself about what your limitations were. And again, the big deal there is that people, when I want you to test your maxes, that's fatigued while running the same program the way you would run it in training. Meaning if you're going to test a bench press, a barbell row, and an overhead press, you don't wait 15 minutes between each exercise, because you're not going to wait 15 minutes between exercises in training. They should be your fatigued maxes, as if you had, test them the same way that you're going to train them. If you know that you're going to overhead press shortly after bench pressing, you test your bench press max and you push it all the way out so you know what your max is, and now you're fatigued from hitting that rep max. So that fatigue should still be there when you do the overhead press shortly after. And I think that's what's really messing some people up, is that they're waiting way too long on their test day. They're taking an hour or 2 hours to do their test day instead of 15 minutes. You should be able to test all your lifts for your testing day inside of 15 minutes. Use those as your actual maxes for testing purposes to calculate what you're going to be lifting throughout the actual next 12 weeks in the program. You shouldn't be all fresh and recovered when you hit each one if you know you're going to do them in the same days in actual training. You're giving yourself unrealistic numbers. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. First question. If you train the same muscle twice within a 48-hour period, i.e. full body 2 days in a row, would the second session negatively interfere with the growth response from the first session? Thanks. Good question. Actually, as far as interfering with the growth stimulus itself, probably not, because you have actually done most of your growing at the 24-hour mark. Again, when we talk about the 48-hour window of growth, that is a maximum window. For a lot of people, it's only down closer to 28. It's a 28 to 48 hour growth window. So you've probably finished at least 50%, if not close to 100% of your growth, depending upon how long your muscle protein synthesis uptime is. Now, the downside, the actual additional micro tearing in the muscles from the new workout could interfere, because you stop growing during those hours that you are repairing those micro traumas, from what we can tell from the newest data. So in theory, it could, particularly if your workout volume was too high on the second workout. The trick to making everyday training working is to keep the volume so limited, and particularly the eccentric reps so limited in their scope, that you don't cause very significant micro tearing and micro traumas in the muscle tissue. So if the first workout had a lot of volume, it probably wouldn't interfere with it, as long as the second workout immediately after had the volume really low. And again, no slow negatives, no forced reps, nothing like that. It shouldn't interfere, and if anything, it'll reinforce the training stimulus from the first workout. And that's the thing that you need to always remember with back-to-back training. Volume and eccentric reps need to be limited to a great extent if you're going to be training, again, the same muscle group, same lifts day to day. And again, that's kind of what was noted with even Bulgarian training. The reason it was successful is because the training volumes per session were very low. They're hitting training maxes with an occasional 3-rep back off. But the thing is, they aren't doing a lot of eccentrics. Most of the exercises done in Bulgarian training were explosive style lifts, where people are not doing slow eccentric reps. They were squats, deadlifts, and then the Olympic lifts and push presses, things like that. Those exercises that really have a very limited eccentric component, because you do a fast eccentric or there's no eccentric. And that's one of the reasons that the Bulgarians were able to get away with hitting training maxes up to 3 times a day, 6 days in a row on all of their main lifts. That's how they're getting away with it, because of the lack of the eccentric rep. Because that's the main thing you've got to remember. The eccentric training, slow eccentrics, anything that causes additional micro tearing will temporarily blunt your muscle growth while it's healing those traumas. So accordingly, that stuff has no real place in really high frequency training, because it could, in theory, reduce your actual muscle growth, reduce your muscle gains, and all of that. So again, it depends upon the nature of the second workout, as far as it could inhibit some of the growth from the first one. If you minimally inhibit the growth from the first one and you re-emphasize some of the main training components, then it will cause additional gains. But yeah, you could lose gains from it in theory if micro traumas were too excessive. So again, a little bit of a complicated answer, not straightforward. All right, next question. Hey Jason, regarding volume for growth, if one heavy set taken to near failure RPE 9 is enough to stimulate new growth, how come programs such as your off-season strength program and other successful intermediate programs tend to have multiple sets per exercise, 3 to 5, for higher rep sets, 8 to 10 for a majority of the program, with little time spent training over 85% 1 rep max? Couldn't someone lift heavy weights with less volume and still make just as much progress? Okay, great question. The answer is no, because training volume still matters. Things like my intermediate off-season program is a maximum growth program. It is, again, an athletic-based program. That's a program for athletes who are trying to gain as much size and strength as possible in a 12-week window. When you're trying to maximize gains, that means that you are maximizing gains. That becomes the driving priority in your life. And the thing is, that assumes that your lifestyle allows for it, that you're not concerned with the fatigue, potential DOMs, anything else that could interfere with your day-to-day life, and that you enjoy relatively high volumes of training. And that's the important point there. My intermediate program, and a lot of those intermediate programs, whether you're talking about Bill Starr's program or Mad Cows, which actually that's the same thing, the Texas Method, anything like that, these are intermediate programs for athletes. Athletes have very serious goals. It takes a very high priority in their life. When we talk about more minimalist training in terms of volume, we're talking about people who maybe they don't have a complete passion for training. It's not the most important thing in their life. It's a secondary thing they do for fun. They want to make gains, but they don't care if they only make 70% of the possible muscle gains they could make per year. All right, that's an important point to consider. If it means less time in the gym, it means less fatigue management that they have to deal with so that they can focus on other activities besides just weightlifting, or their athleticism, then doing less sets gives them the option of doing so. They might only make 70 or 80% of the muscle gains that they could have made with a maximum program that's going to maximize those things, and that's the big difference. So the thing we're talking about here is the difference between someone who is a casual lifter, a fitness enthusiast. Now, and I'm not saying a fitness enthusiast might not get to over a 500-pound deadlift or a 300-pound bench press doing this, because they absolutely can over time, but they're not going to milk out their maximum possible gains. If someone is an athlete, which all three of these programs are written for that we're talking about, right? All of these successful intermediate programs are for athletes. For an athlete who is competitive, not making their maximum progress is not really an option if they want to stay competitive. If they want to keep that scholarship, their football scholarship, they want to keep their wrestling scholarship, if they want to have a chance to go pro in their sport, or they want to earn that scholarship that they're working for. A lot of these programs could still be used by high school students who need as much size and strength as possible to get that football scholarship. This is what we're talking about. People in a competitive environment who are willing to sacrifice their day-to-day quality of life, deal with fatigue, some soreness, things like that in order to ensure their career or their competitive edge. That's a big difference between that and someone who is training just to get bigger and stronger for their health and fitness and ego. There's a big difference between the two, between someone who is a competitive athlete versus someone who is just a purely recreational athlete or recreational lifter. And that's the big difference there. And I think that generally a reduced volume like we're talking about is going to give a little less progress, but it's going to interfere with people's other lives less, meaning people who have full-time careers, relationships, jobs, families, things like that. They need to really make their fitness a secondary priority, but they can still, put in 70% effort, 80% effort, and glean those benefits without the extra fatigue management and the stress that comes with it. Because again, you have to remember, people who are running athletic-based programs are people who don't have really stressful lives outside of their sports world. All right, an intermediate level athlete in college doesn't have a lot of stressors outside of his tests and outside of playing sports to win, because that is basically his job at that point. And so that's who these sort of programs are written for. Or, again, someone who's a very serious competitive powerlifter might run these. But the thing that you've got to remember, these maximum programs don't allow for you to have really stressful lives and stressful careers and things outside of your training. And that's the big difference when we talk about minimalist training versus training for actual athletes. And my intermediate program is an athlete-based program. It is an off-season program, which implies for an athlete, because people who don't compete in anything don't have on-season versus off-season. So the name is right there in it. All right, next question. If someone would do the same routine with the exact same weight and repetitions for 1 month with inadequate calories, but then repeat the same thing for one more month, this time in a calorie surplus, gaining weight, would they gain muscle? Curious about your insight on this. Thank you. All right, this question is so absurd that I'm going to answer it anyways. Would they gain muscle? Yes, absolutely. Someone who sits around sedentary and doesn't really work out other than just walking around, who eats enough food to gain weight, also gains muscle. So someone who's lifting weights, why wouldn't they gain muscle also doing the same thing? Food is anabolic. The only issue you have is that in many cases you gain more fat than muscle as an anabolic response to your food. But that doesn't mean that food by itself doesn't put muscle on you. So to answer the question, of course they would gain muscle. Why wouldn't they? Now, the reason this question is absurd, and we're going to address the absurdity to it, is if they had been able to complete these weights while consuming inadequate calories and gaining no weight and no significant amount of muscle, once they are eating enough food, the extra food should allow them to train harder and put more weight on the bar. Once they start gaining muscle immediately from the new food in the first week, the extra muscle should also allow them to increase their workload as well. So with both of these factors involved, the question becomes, why would they continue to do the exact same workload for another month that they were able to do without the extra food? They're gaining both training fuel as well as strength from the extra muscle mass. They should be able to increase the workload quite a bit over what they were doing in the previous month. And if they did that and they increased the workload itself based upon the extra calories and the extra muscle they're gaining, they would gain muscle even faster. So they're actually shortchanging themselves purely to illustrate a point in a hypothetical question. So on the same amount of calories, they're going to gain less muscle and gain more fat while training at the exact same workload that they had been without consuming the extra food, when they could be doing more and be gaining muscle twice as fast. So in a way, the question is absurd. The answer is yes, but they'll gain less muscle and gain more fat than if they had actually just increased the workload, which they should be able to easily do with the changes in diet. So absurd question, but I guess we went ahead and answered it because we learned a couple things from it. All right, next question. I ran a powerlifting program for 6 months and bicep growth was greatly limited. After a short break for other physical pursuits, I'm running the same program again, but want to add in more bicep work. I've been doing a rest pause set after my main workout, alternating bicep and hammer curls on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Do you think this is too much volume and only 2 sets would be better? You didn't say how much volume you were doing, so brother, I really don't know how much too much volume is. However, I will state that no matter what program you're running and what all of your goals are, it's my opinion that if you have a very noticeable weak point, either in your performance or your physique, you have a weak point in reaching your goals. And in this case, your biceps, I don't think it's unreasonable to incorporate 2 different isolation movements that work different functions of that muscle, because a hammer curl is going to be quite a bit different from a standard curl, whether it's a barbell curl with a straight bar or a dumbbell. So you are getting 2 different types of growth stimulus. But if this is a very noticeable weak point, I don't think it's unreasonable to incorporate 2 very different isolation movements 3 times a week for that weak point until it gets caught up. You know what? Even though, again, I'm one of the people who tends to say compound movements first, isolation second. Isolation can be optional for some people. In your case, I think that your use of the isolation movements here is warranted, and I think it's reasonable. I have no problem with what you say you're doing here. In fact, I think it's a pretty good idea. Continue to do it until your biceps are balanced out where you want them with the rest of your physique. I think that's the best way to fix it. It's what you're doing right now. So no, it doesn't seem like it's too much, even though it is 2 different isolation movements. And I usually say most muscles don't need that, but if they're really lagging that bad, at least you're picking 2 very different isolation movements that have different focuses. And hopefully that should be enough, doing them 3 times a week to sort out your problem. So best of luck to you there. No, I don't think it's unreasonable on your part at all. All right, next question. Hey Jason, the creators of the XFit games say that the overall winner is the fittest person on earth. In your opinion, what is the ultimate competitive test of fitness? Thanks. All right, no, I think these games are a bunch of convoluted mess, and I think they have a lot of different awkward exercises with bad technique and everything. So no, that wouldn't be my best way to determine it. What I would look at would be individual tests with individual scorings to where you rate all the normal performance elements. Because if we're talking about fitness from a performance perspective, what we should probably look at is something like maximum strength. So we could probably test them on something like a max deadlift, a max push press, right? So you've got your two different power movements. You could maybe even pick a third one, but I think the deadlift and the push press would be fine, although we could do a power clean also. So 1 rep maxes on those 3 exercises using a good technique, and that could be your strength and power component. A basic conditioning test, so you could have people run a 5K for time, and that's how you would put it up there. So then you've got that conditioning component, and then maximum endurance. You could have them run a marathon for time, like a 20-mile foot race for time, and do them all in the same day, back to back to back. And I think that would give you a much better milestone of how fit a person is. So you would again have a power component, which would equal 1/3 of their score, and again, maybe 10% of their score being their maximum on each of those lifts, and that's how people would rank up. A 5K run for their overall conditioning for time, and then followed by a 20-mile foot race for time later. Again, give them a little bit of time, a break, and some food in between. And yeah, that would be your best way to determine overall fitness, because that would balance out everything from body composition, strength weight ratios, and everything. Because ultimately, sure, someone could show up who's 300 pounds and win the power component, but then they get outrun in the other two conditioning and endurance components by other people. And again, the same thing, someone who's all endurance, who might win the marathon, might not win the 5K, and then they're going to get crushed if they're too light and too weak in the strength and power end. So ultimately, I think these 3 basic tests would be the best way to determine overall fitness in some games. And they could split it up into 2 days. In fact, they could probably do the power component one day, then the 5K the same day, later in the day, and then the marathon run the next day. And yeah, I think that would be a far more reasonable test. Now, would it be as entertaining? Probably not, but would it be a better test of overall fitness to determine who's the most fit competitor? Yeah, you betcha, because it covers all of your important performance elements as far as fitness are concerned. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.